Welcome, Bitcoiners. Welcome. Sunny day, right? And I checked, Bitcoin's running. We're good. All that's left to do is have some coffee and talk about what's new. Epiphany. Today is Epiphany. Did you know that? We got a lot of simulation stuff to start the show. So remember, today is Epiphany. January 6th, did you know, is the 12th day of Christmas. Epiphany, that's what it's called. Epiphany. Amazing. And did you know Epiphany is celebrated in America anyway, in the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico? Two stories relevant to Bitcoiners right now, of course. So it's a national holiday or a public holiday in the US Virgin Islands. Well, the Attorney General gets the day off as it is, right? So no Epstein follow-up happening there today. So, of course, January 6th, a day of infamy in America, but a day where most people thought it was pretty funny. Right? Like the Buffalo guy, right? We're still out there trying to decipher exactly how a nuclear power would have abdicated all of its power and control, the strongest military the world's ever known. But the Buffalo-headed guy got the magic lectern. Remember, he occupied a magic room with a magic lectern. And I mean, the nuclear codes would have been just given to him through osmosis. It's a type of epiphany, right? It's a type of epiphany, of course. Here's a few of the simulation things that we're noticing today on Epiphany, January 6th. So, did anyone see the Dana White story of a couple days ago? Remember Dana White? He's the founder of the UFC, the whole league, right? And I think he made a lot of money out of it. He's a very wealthy guy now. And I'm generally a fan of Dana White. I think he's a cool guy from what I know and from what people say and from the things he said and all of that. I'm generally a fan. I don't watch a ton of UFC, but I've been won over a little bit over the years. I was pretty grossed out by some of that when it first started. I used to go in South Korea to some of the fights. I had a lot of friends doing black belt martial arts back then, and Taekwondo is the main fighting sport of South Korea. And there was a whole league of these fighters, and before UFC had really gotten traction, there was a few different ones. And I went to these fights. I saw some broken legs, and I was like, oh god, I'm not going to watch this anymore. But then over time, of course, I'm from Quebec. The next time I went to Japan and Korea was when I graduated from law school in 08, 09, and Georges St-Pierre was the biggest thing. And I'm from Montreal, Georges St-Pierre. So whenever I'd say to people, I'm from Montreal, oh, Georges St-Pierre. I had no idea how big of a star he was at the time. And that's what got me into it. So I learned about Dana White and all these folks, and now generally know who's what and when there's a big event, and think it's pretty interesting. But Dana White made news recently because he was on vacation in Mexico, hanging out in a really weird place, as I understand, in Cabo. He was sort of hanging out where 20-year-old spring breakers would hang out. So what he was doing there in the first place, let that be a cautionary tale to anyone who imbibes spirits. They're called spirits for a reason. It's not just alcohol. They are called spirits, right? So that's not a mistake. And so he was drinking, and it looks like his wife slapped him up and stuff. I haven't seen the whole video. I've just seen the reaction. I don't tend to care too much about that stuff. But here's the simulation story. So Dana White, of course, the UFC producer, creator, founder, great show promoter, great fight promoter, had a new show coming out. It was the slap game. He was going to make a show out of the slap game, and these people stand next to each other, whack each other in the face, and then whoever can resist long enough is the winner. So apparently the show was to debut in just a few days, January 11th on TBS. So after Dana White got slapped by his wife in a drunken thing at a weird bar over the holidays, my audio is bad. Okay. I'm told my audio is not great today. 1 second. Cracking audio. Okay, thanks for telling me, guys. Okay, let me try and do something here. Oh, no. Shocking. Give me a second. Well, the good news is, team, I've figured out you're not seeing the camera. Has happened before. Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah, let me get this. 1 second. All right, team. How does that sound? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No. Brian Peterson asks if a 3.5 millimeter partially pushed in. No, it's one of these USB-C. Sorry, Brian Peterson says good. Yes is good, or yes is bad. We'll see. I'll switch to a whole different mic in a second if this isn't working. I got more here, guys. Yay! Great. Okay, good. Excellent, 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 excellent. Thank you. This is big news. You're not even realizing it because I haven't switched the settings on my the software I use to stream out, Restream it's called. But the camera that I managed to set up, I finally got my iMac to work with my iPhone here. And so this is a HD camera. I know that the settings are throttled on the Restream system that I'm using. So what's going out to Twitter and what's going out to YouTube will be capped based on my account, but I can actually extend that. So from now on, I think we're going to be getting a much better screen. I don't have the whiteboard set up yet. That should be done this weekend when I get the pens, but I believe next week, you're going to be able to see it in beautiful HD because the camera is set up, it's working, it's coming through right now. Again, you're being throttled from Restream itself, but if I change my account, Restream will allow me to do more. And if I went straight on YouTube right now, you'd be getting an HD image. So thanks for letting me know the sound isn't out. Increased product quality, production quality coming in the next few days. This week has been adjustment period, but I think you're going to see a good studio soon. So thanks for letting me know. This mic has this problem from time to time. I like the mic because it's simple and seems to be the least troublesome, but we'll try and fix that. So where was I? We were talking about simulation and what's going on with that. So the Dana White thing, it's just one of these stories, right? Dana White, of course, tried to get the slap game going. It's now canceled, even though he was doing the slaps. So the next one that I have in the simulation theory stuff, everyone has been talking for days now about the food pyramid and the Lucky Charms. So it even made it to Tucker Carlson. So we said it here first. It turns out the Tufts University food compass actually came from November. And I think I even have a memory of talking about Lucky Charms back then, but it finally made the main news cycle in the past couple of days. I'm not saying we were the ones who made it the news cycle again, but we covered it and lots of people have been talking about it since. This is the one where Lucky Charms by brand name was rated higher than whole milk and butter and steak and hamburger and all this stuff. It's great. It's great. But here's what Tufts did yesterday. So they're in the news because of this food compass and everyone kind of laughing at them. It's a big joke. Of course, it's a scam. But yesterday, you got to hand it to Tufts. Here's what they did, right? Tufts came out and announced that students at their university will no longer require booster shots of the COVID vaccine in order to attend. Right? That's pretty big news, actually. Very few universities have gone that far because it wasn't just a mandate at universities. It wasn't just get the needle. It was get the extra needles. You got to keep getting the needle in order to go. So one wasn't enough in universities. I wasn't really aware of that. But from what I understand, it was a big deal. And you have Jay Bhattacharya saying here, good news from Tufts University. It is decided to stop requiring the bivalent COVID booster. Tufts leaders mandated it despite no demonstrated ability to stop transmission. Finally, a prominent American university takes a step towards sanity. That's pretty good news, right? So you get the coincidence of the slapping, right, on Epiphany Day, January 6th. You get the coincidence of the slapping and the canceled slap show, but the Tufts one is a good one, right? The moral or the food compass being a big joke, but finally coming out with some good stuff here. And it actually reminds me, and that's sort of the theme today of, what is Epiphany? The 12th day of Christmas. It's actually the day where the three kings visited baby Jesus, right? So that's why it's that day. In some places, as I said, it's a big holiday. Puerto Rico, it's actually a holiday there, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, holiday there as well. Here's where and that's what everyone's talking about on January 6th today is, of course, the anniversary of 2 years ago and what it all means and where are we today and what's going on. But I take this COVID case, and we're going to talk about China today, and we're definitely going to talk about Trump and January 6th, but let's put them all in order, because when you think of these three kings, three wise men, we can replace them today in Epiphany with what's going on in China, what's going on with COVID, and what's going on with the US Congress, and kind of get a sense of our own epiphany. So here's what's going on. In the case of COVID, right, lots of news right now. We've got the Dr. McCullough, who is getting roundly criticized today, right? We've not been necessarily fans of Dr. McCullough or Dr. Malone on this show, not because we know anything about their work or anything like that. What we've said from the start here is that COVID proved science itself is broken, right? That's how I see all of this. I look at any study that has to do with masks, the vaccine, what it does, what are the effects, and say, I don't know. And nobody knows, right? I've said for a long time, the whole do your own research thing, it's not a good look. It's not a good look, right? Not on me, not on anyone. You can't do your own research. All of this stuff is really, really hard, really complicated. Doctors themselves are no good at it. But it gets even more complicated, because here's a story from the San Francisco Standard that was published a few weeks ago, and I didn't even know about this. But here's something that you probably knew but haven't seen investigated. So the headline is, these doctors pushed masking COVID lockdowns on Twitter. Turns out they don't even exist. So they go through a couple of these characters. One of them, Dr. Robert Honeyman, and there's a few more. There's 4 in total. And they had these really sad stories, right? So it was this person who said, oh, audio again. Audio again. All right, how about now? Microphone started again. Jeez Louise, guys. I got to figure out the mic situation. I don't know why that would be. Okay, just give me a second. All right, how did that go? I don't know what just happened. Are you back? Do I have anyone here? What just happened? I don't know. Audio good. Well, audio good. Okay. People are around. Don't know what just happened again. I'm going to get a new mic tomorrow. So how about this? If the mic has another problem, let me know in the comments. I'll probably just unplug it and go with the system I have on this. I'm going to try the other mics tomorrow. I used one 2 days ago, one of the new mics, and I re-listened to the audio and it was terrible. So that's why I haven't gone back to it. I have to figure out the settings on it before I go back to it. So I'm definitely going to try that, but bear with me for the rest of this one, and I'll just go to the plain mic. The sun is up and Bitcoin is running, right? So we're good. All right, so where was I? I was talking about the doctors on Twitter and the story that they had. So this one, it made the news because this person wrote the following on Twitter, right? Sad to announce that my husband has entered a coma after being in hospital with COVID. The doctor is unsure if he will come out, they tweeted. This year has been the toughest of my life, losing my sister to this virus. So this was just back in December, right? This is the first time in my life I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There was well wishes and all kinds of stuff, right? And there was a few doctors just like this. So someone went in and saying this case was, would be news, I guess, the bad luck of losing your sister and your husband and all of this stuff. Audio better, yeah. And so someone looked into it, right? Did this really happen? And they found out there was a web of these 4 doctors that would retweet each other. They all had very similar progressive ideas, and they were all petrified of COVID and definitely yelling and screaming at people who didn't wear masks, who didn't get the booster, a lot of virtue signaling about masks and boosters, and really, in this case, targeted to the LGBTQ plus community, just given their own background and their own followers and their own world they sort of came from and tweeted about. So it turns out that none of these people were real. And even more sinister, we don't know who created them. Now, we've seen a lot of stuff from Twitter files that would suggest this is sort of part and parcel with what's been going on, that there could be some folks out there trying to run disinformation campaigns in order to push public policy in one way or the other, in order to really capture an audience or a demographic and push them in a certain direction, have them afraid of something or whatever. But nevertheless, there's just no people there. Right? So a lot of the dialogue you already hear on Twitter about COVID, not only was the science manipulated and part of an agenda, the people even arguing were part of an agenda. They weren't real, right? They were fictions, they were creations. And a lot of us suspected that, but to see it play out like this is interesting news, right? So everything was wear a mask, get your booster, and they were not real people. Now, it's not only that. When Twitter finally did change its policy on misinformation around COVID, which was announced back in December, I believe, and a lot of people talking about it at the time. Elon Musk, one of the first things he did was say, we're not going to police correct or incorrect information about COVID on Twitter anymore, and it's just going to be that way. Now, these compilation videos, they had that one years ago about all the local news broadcasters. Everyone has sort of seen it, whether speaking off the same script, where they'll say, we are the trusted news, and then they would just be edited together so that you'd see a different person say every word, but they're all on the same, similar stage. They're all in their local news, ABC, NBC, CBS stage, and they would go around, and it would turn into 100 of them at once talking, then one of them talking, and it was all the same script. And that video has gone viral. I think everyone's seen it. Luke Rudkowski, who will likely be a speaker at Bitcoin 2023 in Miami, May 18th to 20th. He's the guy who works with Tim Pool. It turns out Luke Rudkowski went to school with the fellow who's helping me program the event, Alex McShane. So we have a pretty good in there. So we're trying to get Tim Pool and Rudkowski, because we have a real focus on getting a lot of these independent media folks. And, I wrote yesterday to Viva Fry. I don't know if you guys follow Viva Fry at all. I went to law school with Viva Fry, so he's a personal friend. So weirdly, another coincidence, we, know people in this independent media sphere that are outside of Bitcoin that are doing just great. So Luke Rudkowski shared a video today of all these same journalists. It's one of these compilations, and they're reading the same script again. And this time the script that they got was about Elon Musk's changes to Twitter and misinformation around COVID. And every one of them has the same script. So Luke, if you want to go to Luke Rudkowski's Twitter today, you'll see the video. It's hilarious, right? So the exact words are like, be cautious while looking for COVID information in the Twitterverse, right? It was all about the Twitterverse. And it's really spooky and eerie when you hear these folks sort of warning you about misinformation when they're reading off of a script and the faces are just interchangeable. It's all the same sort of makeup face and high production quality. And, another reason why having a huge focus on high production quality for a news show like this can be misleading, right? Because once you have the high production quality, well, then what happens, right? You end up getting a script too, right? So mic problem again. My goodness. Okay, audio. Okay, we're gonna go with the no audio situation because this thing sucks. This thing's a piece of crap, I guess, today. All right. All right. All right. How about that? Well, not getting my breakup today. Is that really you on the Telegram channel? Channel Indemnity? But I didn't comment. Me? Yeah, it's me. I'm just Nolan back. In and out now? Shops. All right. Spotty, huh? Worse. Let's see. Let's see. You think it's a RAM issue? You think it's a RAM issue? It's such a good show today. How about now? Different. It says that connected. It shouldn't be a RAM issue. iMac. Have enough juice. I should. Your video quality free for your audio. The video is, I believe, so processing is in that way. Hell. All right. Well, we're back on the original, and I have no answers to a strong machine should be okay. Gotta restart. I'll call you. speed really strong, Steve. Best it's been. And I have a hard wire, and I checked it. I think 60 megs upload. This was out of place. I think it is a feedback loop. Restream at this point. All right, let me try and I'm shutting everything. I have a lot running. I'm gonna shut your stream buffer delay. A lot of options in the restream. It is a pulse. Okay. All right. Can you think I can increase the stream buffer delay? All like mics that none of them seem. Look at these fucking things. I have a million mark. This shit. More mics, more wire. All right. Maybe this stupid fucking thing. Anything now? Anything now? Any audio? Anything of decent quality? I don't even know what I'm connected to. I'm just shifting through different things here. Jeez. Good? Listenable? We can listen? I put it right to my, okay. So what I did this time is I've just put it right on my iPhone. We're using my iPhone microphone as it's connected to, better we hear the construction. Oh no. Well, there shouldn't be too much. It was just one truck moving down the road. Good for now, yeah. Okay. Thank you, team. Okay, so Luke Rudkowski, that's where we were, right? We were at Luke Rudkowski. So today what we're trying to talk about is simulation, some coincidences. It's Epiphany. Epiphany being the last of the 12 days of Christmas. The last of the 12 days of Christmas being the day the three kings, the three wise men came and visited little baby Jesus. And that's why it's celebrated on places like the U.S. Virgin Islands. So the Attorney General not working today. That's what we're not following up in the J.P. Morgan Epstein case and what to do about it and what's going on with all of that. And now we're going through how, in this case, the three visitors are COVID, China, CCP, and we're going to talk about Trump and how these three are actually opening up everyone's eyes and having an epiphany. So it's another type of epiphany is what we're talking about today. And the first thing we talked about was how Twitter, just from the misinformation standpoint, the standpoint of how do we even talk about the information on Twitter about COVID, and what an effect that was. And my argument is that what we saw from COVID on Twitter and everywhere else, all of the institutions, it didn't prove vaccines work or don't work, or masks work or don't work, or any of those things. I don't know anything about that. What I know is that science itself, science is broken, right? The whole concept of science. The scientific method, fine, that works fine. But science as an argument, as a system, not working so great. And do your own research, again, really bad look, right? I spend a lot of time with data. I don't know how to do my own research. And I'm one of the people who made a career out of working with data and reading data and packaging data and all of those things. So I'm as far as being an expert, I'm a professional data packager, manipulator, reader, all those things, right? That's what I've done in my career. That's what I know how to do and what I'm good at. So what I saw from data management and all the data coming in and how do we filter it was science broken itself. And we can see it from, it's not just the idea of science broken, it's science being used by fake people, which is what we just talked about, right? The fake people on Twitter who weren't even doctors, weren't even real people, that were clearly targeting different groups. In this case, the LGBTQ plus group being specifically targeted with misinformation. And then turning the page from there, when Elon Musk stopped enforcing misinformation policies on Twitter, I've mentioned this video that Luke Rudkowski has shared, and it's a compilation video of all the news folks saying, don't go on Twitter. The exact words are, be extra cautious while looking for information related to COVID in the Twitterverse. They keep saying Twitterverse. That's one of the tells in the way that it was distributed, this talking points. That's the Twitterverse every time. So you see all of these journalists referring constantly to the Twitterverse and it being unreliable as a source of information, while they all say the same thing, have the same makeup, have the same production quality, better audio than on this show. We'll give them that. We'll give them the better audio. But it looks kind of weird with all the makeup, right? So, but it goes even further, right? You get Joe Rogan, who was duped in one of these cases too. And it was a tweet, and he brought it up with Brett Weinstein, so Eric Weinstein's brother. These are regular guests on the show. And this ended up being a story in Joe Rogan getting a mistake and then correcting it perfectly, where when Joe Rogan found out 2 days ago that he was reading misinformation on his show from Twitter, he cut the clip out and said, we got duped. And all it was he treated a fake tweet by someone as real. And the tweet was this: I'll never regret the vaccine, even if it turns out I injected actual poison and have only days to live. My heart and was in the right place. That was a misspelling on their part. I got vaccinated out of love, while anti-vaxxers did everything out of hate. If I have to die because of my love for the world, then so be it. But I will never regret or apologize it. So Joe Rogan read this on the show, and everyone was like, oh my God, it's a thing. This is just a stupid person. But he realized that he had fallen for a dupe. This was a satire, right? This was satirical. And, even, what's his name again? Shane. He's the fella who I've become a pretty big fan of. He's the writer that followed Kanye West for a few days, Ye West, and he wrote about this case, saying, more or less that you can't really tell the difference between parody and reality anymore. It's something we talked about yesterday, right? The blurring line between parody and reality, when in general you can just let things be, just say them as they are, and they'll be funny. So here's what he says. So this is talking about Joe Rogan. This is Shane Cashman. So Shane Cashman, Indemnity Sense. Shane Cashman, really becoming one of my favorite writers out there. Really long form stuff, but he's another guy we should definitely get for Bitcoin 2023 in Miami. Shane Cashman working for Luke Rudkowski and Tim Pool. He's part of the Tim Pool little fiefdom. So he says, there's hardly any distinction between reality and parody. It's like some people believe that Alex Stein 99's early pranks at local government meetings. Alex Stein 99, of course, was the guy who would go and cry and say, oh, it's so hard. I have to work 2 jobs to pay for my wife and her boyfriend and all of these things. So really funny guy, Alex Stein. A lot of people morphed into full-blown caricatures over the last handful of years. We got to stay vigilant with reality, he puts in quotation marks. And then he says here, it was around those early Alex Stein 99 pranks that went viral when I started saying he was our modern Andy Kaufman. Him and Ye, of course. If you guys don't know who Andy Kaufman is, Andy Kaufman was on the show Taxi in the 1970s, but more importantly, he pioneered the form of comedy that would make the audience uneasy and unsettle them. So he would just get up on stage and not say anything, and people would boo him and get angry, but that was the show, right? It was that. And Jim Carrey did a movie about him called Man on the Moon. The REM song Man on the Moon is about Andy Kaufman, right? Andy Kaufman in a wrestling match. Audio problems creeping back slowly. I think it's a configuration issue. You're probably right, Brandon. I'm gonna have to when I still listenable. All right, when I we're only gonna be going for a few more minutes here. When I'm done, I'm gonna try and redo it again today. We're getting there, guys. Thanks for your patience. It sometimes takes time. Unfortunately, you'd think someone would come up with a product, like a phone or a computer or an iPad that just did the basic things well, right? Audio and video, and both of which would be at a good quality. But you need, I got 4 devices going here and mics everywhere to do the most basic things that you should be able to do without any help, right? Everyone should just be able to use their phone or the thing to broadcast. I don't understand why it has to be that complicated. Mics are like printers, Brian. Yeah, they are exactly like printers. I hate printers. They're the worst. How has it been 40 years and they still don't work? But there you go. We're getting there. At least we're getting there. So this whole story, you get fake people on Twitter. You get even folks like Joe Rogan, can't tell the difference between reality and parody. Everyone really just following narrative biases, following the data that confirms their version of reality. So what we're saying here is not that we know what's going on with COVID and the treatments and any of that stuff, right? I don't know. What we're saying is using science to get to the bottom of it ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna work. And the more we think it's gonna work, the worse people are gonna do. So at a certain point, you've got to be able to just use your own risk management and your own ability to navigate, and that's about all you can do, right? You can even see, though, science, right? We know that it has at least been beneficial, though, for society to watch the meltdown of science on Twitter or on YouTube in relation to COVID. Because think about it, right? We've talked a lot about the Paul Ehrlich 60 Minutes interview, right? So forget about what Paul said for a second, right? He's an idiot and has got nothing right for 40 or 50 years now. I think that's clear. What we're interested in is something we mentioned yesterday, the reaction to it, right? The reaction to it. Years ago, 60 Minutes, coupled with some professor with all kinds of credentials, case closed, right? Where everyone would just say, oh, dang, did you see we're in a huge catastrophic end to various civilizations, various animals and creatures in the world. It's a mass extinction event, right? People would have bought it, I think. What happened immediately was all the folks on Twitter, all the independent people, all the smart people, all the folks who have a clue about what's going on in the world and a bit of history said, this guy's a liar, that's a scam, don't follow it, right? It happened all over the place. You had Elon Musk, you had Jordan Peterson, you had all the folks who I think are a sign that we're in the golden age, because whenever you have educators and people like that as real celebrities, right, you're in a good place as a society, despite all the other trouble, right? So we had folks like that who came out and said immediately, this is a scam and this is stupid. But it's even more sinister, right? You've got Paul Ehrlich coming out today saying 60 Minutes extinction story. has brought the usual right wing out in force. If I'm always wrong, this is Paul himself, right? If I'm always so wrong, so is science, since my work is always peer reviewed, including the population bomb, and I've gotten virtually every scientific honor. So he's gotten every honor, and his work was peer reviewed, right? So he says he's right, right? Because his work was peer reviewed, and he followed the science. But did you even know that peer-reviewed studies, right, of all the peer-reviewed studies, about half of them turn out to be a scam and lies and fake? Half. And a scam is a harsh way of describing it. Just simply put, right, I'm not going to qualify my language. Half of them turn out to be wrong. Half of those that turn out to be right only turn out to be a little bit right? So even the system that we have, the peer reviews and the credentials, they don't really produce great results at all, even as it is. So here he is saying, oh, I've got, my work's peer reviewed, so it followed the science. Plus, I get honors, so shut the fuck up, right? Everyone's saying, but you're wrong. Like, it still doesn't matter. And there's a way of interpreting just how wrong he is. If you look at this little piece that was taken out of the newspaper today. It is true that the book Elric extorted readers to remember that his scenarios are just possibilities, not predictions. But it's also true that he slipped into the language of prediction occasionally in the book, and more often in other settings. This is a quote, most of the people who are going to die in the greatest cataclysm in the history of man have already been born, he promised in 1969 magazine article. Sometime in the next 15 years, the end will come, Ulrich told CBS News a year later. And by the end, I mean an utter breakdown of the capacity of the planet to support humanity. At the time, he was already going on television saying we need population control, we should use psyops to avoid large families. He was saying you should literally only put large families in a entertainment context where it seems like a disaster and you don't want to be around that. So he was already promoting that then. That's really how he was thinking at the time. So, what we've seen, and I think if it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't have been able to see Paul Ulrich and his lies this week as clearly as we do, right? And he admits it right here. He admits it. I followed the science. Even though I'm not going to look at whether I'm right or wrong, it doesn't matter. He got honors and he followed the science. So he's peer-reviewed, so get the fuck out of here, right? That's what he's saying. But luckily now we understand science is totally broken, right? It's totally broken. And the scientific method remains valuable, insightful, useful. We should build everything using the hypothesis, confirmation of hypothesis, testing, all of that stuff still remains useful. But saying that everyone's capable of administering the scientific method to the same extent, and that the media is capable of understanding who is using the scientific method correctly, is completely erased. So, as Brian Peterson says here, fiat science, indeed, fiat science, right? So, but the good news is through COVID, we understand the scam of follow the science, right? I can't think of 3 stupider words in the modern world than follow the science. I can't. There is no stupider mantra than that, right? Because science, as everyone knows, isn't about following anything, right? It's about questioning. That's the point. You take the scientific method to the questions you have. You don't build consensus on science. That's nothing. That's politics, right? It's always been politics. We've known this about the global warming debate for a long time, that anytime someone says to you the consensus of scientists is, cut them off. Just cut them off. It doesn't matter. One person right is the scientific method. One person against 1,000 being right is the point of science, right? Consensus is a scam. If someone says the word consensus in science, check your wallet. You're being robbed. Every time. Check your wallet, right? Someone is robbing you. So don't listen. So we learned that, right? We learned that. That's the first sort of horseman of the first wiseman of this change, right? The next one that I have today, right, is China, right? So China. So China, if you recall, a few years ago when the Evergrande thing started, when all of the conversations around Chinese liquidity, Chinese credit started spilling over into American real estate, for example. Like in Canada, a lot of people are worried about Chinese contagion of their real estate bubble coming to Canada. Of course, in Toronto, in Vancouver, other places, we've seen real estate go through the roof, and the buyers are often coming from China. We're not against Chinese people buying homes in America, of course, right? What we're against is a contagion of the Chinese central bank and easy liquidity coming to America and forcing competition between banking systems and their credit worthiness and credit availability and liquidity. And it turns out when the Evergrande stuff started and there were some rumors and potential catastrophes brewing within the Chinese real estate sector. And don't forget, in China, the reason why the real estate sector is so overheated is because it's really the only avenue people have to invest, right? They're banned from participating in the stock market unless they have a certain wealth, just like in America. And it's not easy to get exposure to Chinese tech companies, equity, all that kind of stuff. So everyone is left, the 1.3 billion people are left trying to protect their wealth by buying real estate. And the real estate there is even culturally ingrained as necessary to even get married. For example, if a man isn't a homeowner, forget it, right? It's not going to work. He's not going to get a mate. So that's a major cultural reason that's driving everyone towards this one avenue of wealth and all these things in China. So it turns out now because it was so overheated, they started putting in. President Xi put some controls in place, which they called the 3 red lines. And these were all just about debt caps of these companies. So they can't, just like a country, we talk about the relative ratio of their debt to GDP, right? So how much debt do they have? How big is their economy? It's a little bit like, even though it shouldn't be used this way, it's a little bit like a company's balance sheet and their own debt. So what they're saying now is that they put these caps on to avoid a catastrophic downturn in Chinese real estate. Now, what they're saying is forget it. The caps are off. Let them play the way they did, right? Because the truth is the industry would not be able to survive in that instance. So everyone wondering now what it's going to do and what's going on with that. But it's only one half of the story in China, right? Of course, they've stopped that because this is economic, right? The economics have to go up because as we've framed China on this show, China, under the zero COVID policy, signaled a big change in their country. But the economic thing wasn't going to be the way anymore. They were going to go with full-on authoritarianism, full-on chauvinism, full-on militaristic national patriotism in order to guide the country because the economic thing wasn't going to work. We believe on this show that, or I do anyway, that President Xi is one of the few people who really knows the truth about Chinese demographics. They're not what they seem to be. I saw even in normal counting, the way they advertise they have 1.3 billion people. I read over these Christmas holidays that India actually now surpassed China as the most populous country in the world, even in the fake numbers. It turns out that China's numbers are probably at least 100 million less. So not 1.3 billion, 1.2 billion. And that missing 100 million, I'm told, I have no proof, by the way, this is just stuff I've read and stuff I've seen from sources that I trust more. And in the same way that I'm criticizing the COVID people for taking data and accepting data because it fits their narrative bias, that's what's happening here, right? So I'm definitely doing that. I'm not hiding it. I think it's true. I think it's true what I'm saying about China, but this is me being a victim of narrative bias because it definitely does fit my worldview. I could be wrong, but I still think I'm right. So 100 million people less than they said they had, right? So 100 million people less than they said they had. So now that zero COVID is over because of the protests, right? We saw millions of people protesting in China. They had to change the COVID policy. They had to go to this new thing, right? So in my worldview, this whole limitation cap being removed on the 3 red lines is because the lockdown and the full authoritarian control angle is now not available to them for a short period of time. So they've got to put the economic argument back on the table for a while. I don't think it's there permanently because this thing can't go on much longer as far as I can tell. So you get this situation in China. But here's the real story, right? Here's the real story. So, and this is from Gordon. Is it from Gordon Chang? No, it's not from Gordon Chang. It's from Jonathan Chang. Jonathan Chang is the Wall Street Journal writer of China-related stuff, right? And so he wrote a big long piece today about how since zero COVID ended, the lockdowns ended, and the harsh lockdown militaristic organization that was in Shanghai and Beijing and some of the other cities is now over. But it turns out that the Chinese central planners did nothing else to protect their population from Omicron and Delta and the other COVID strains that are running through there. So it turns out that we don't, fog of war, very difficult to trust anything coming out of China statistically or narratively even. And it looks like the crematoria are filled up. All the old people, the vulnerables, have never been vaccinated. There's no therapeutic medicines available. So apparently the body bags, the crematoria, all that stuff piling up. But what it really shows to me in the end is that, think about the arguments. Remember how stupid it was, I would say, to compare countries and COVID policies? It was already a dumb exercise, right? Because everyone's different. All these countries are totally different, and it's very difficult to compare an island with America or Sweden with England, right? Sweden and England are two different places, and whatever physical attributes the islands have, or the island of England has, or the physical space of Sweden have a big role to play in transmission of these viruses and all the unknowns that we just didn't understand, right? We still don't understand a lot about COVID transmissibility. We don't. And if you think about all the people who said, "Wow, look at how good it would be," right? Remember, even Justin Trudeau said this, right? That he admired China's dictatorial, centralized government because they could turn policy on a dime. What he's basically arguing is they were more efficient. And that's what anyone who is sort of fetishistic about, oh, look at how China's handling COVID. Why don't we do that in America? Look at how great it is, right? They protect everybody. Well, what we're finding out is that the centralized control of COVID, it didn't work at all, right? They locked people down, but they didn't do anything else. Nothing. Incapable, right? They just did the lockdowns. That's it. They didn't do any other mitigation to help people once zero COVID ended. So now that zero COVID's ended, and those policies aren't there, there's no other way to combat COVID. So it's ripping through the country, right? So here's what Jonathan Cheng said, right? Instead, Beijing plowed more resources into temporary quarantine facilities, lockdowns, and mass testing. By late November, 34% of those aged 80 or older weren't even vaccinated. And China had very few beds for anyone who would need it. So they have no beds, people are dying in the hallways, not working. So right away, COVID itself, right, helps destroy science, media, right? We talked about the compilation videos. Now, central governments, right, with this economic thing and with their inability to manage COVID at all, right, has put that into question, right? So here we go, right? This is the epiphany. The final one, right, before we get going, is on January 6th, right? So January 6th, today is the day, right, that everyone, oh, what happened? It's inauguration day. It's the day that he was confirmed, Biden, as president. That the Electoral College had its vote, and that's the day that the buffalo-headed guy ran into the Congress building and took his magical powers and took control of the greatest military in the history of the world, because it was that close to losing it all, right? We were that close to losing it all. But weirdly, did you know, the big story over in Congress right now is this election of the Speaker of the House. Now, did you know, we wouldn't have really known this, right? It would have been more of the speculation, Well, Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is also in control of security of the physical building. So now that there is no House Speaker, right? This is a Democrat Representative Jason Crow saying, the lack of a House Speaker is a national security issue. Members of the House Intelligence and Armed Services Committees aren't receiving classified briefings or conducting oversight of national security agencies. And he says Republicans must end the chaos, right? So what they're saying is that the Speaker of the House, who's in charge of security today, right? Today they're in charge of security, but there's no speaker, so there's no one securing the building. How much more difficult is that case to make when it was just Nancy Pelosi, when they said it was her fault that the security of Congress wasn't strong enough, that they didn't have guards, they let it happen, right? Now, there was a documentary, we've seen that this was perhaps, right, I have no proof, and I'm definitely mind reading, but that it was perhaps done deliberately, right? That Nancy Pelosi pulled back security of Congress in order for that, something like that to happen, right? And now we see that without a speaker, it is actually vulnerable, right? There's no one in control of security of the House. So it just puts more focus on this person being the actual one who's around and responsible for it. So it does put a lot of what happened on January 6th into question as far as how Nancy Pelosi is related. And what is actually going on with this whole election in Congress is something that I see. You know, when Trump was president, I used to say, well, it looks like the Republic has actually shrunk to just Trump's office. Like, that's all that's left, right? Congress is garbage, Senate is stupid, who knows what's going on. But basically, the whole thing had shrunk to one executive branch and their ability to sustain the country. When Joe Biden comes in, that almost falls, right? So what we have now are just a few congressmen, just a few. There's like 5 or 6 congressmen. That could be considered all that's left of the Republic, the legit Republic, right? Just a few congressmen who are saying, wait a minute, I think we need to be able to decide who's in charge of all the rules and which laws get priority and which investigations get priority and what's going on and how we use Congress to enact an agenda, right? Because of course there is a separation of powers. They're not supposed to be in coordination and lockstep. They're supposed to oppose each other. We built it so that they would oppose each other, and that's not really happening, right? So you get a guy like Gates, right? Gates. Remember, Gates was the Florida congressman who was a big favored son of Trump. Had a really bad January 6th 2 years ago, in that he was caught up in all of this stuff, and then he had right after allegations that he had a girl cross state lines for prostitution or something, but of course nothing ever happened. It was just a smear job. No charges have ever been filed, or I don't know, but maybe they've been filed, but there was never any accusations that were on the record with names, right? So this was all sort of anonymous. And it looks like that's gone now. And Matthew Gaetz actually sponsored Trump as the speaker yesterday. Imagine what that would do, right? Trump as the speaker. It's possible you could do it. But what ends up happening is if Trump even did that role, that would be one of the funniest things we could ever see, of course, right? But what it's done is, I think, anyway, it's confirmed more and more that Congress really is just a handful of people left. Otherwise, it's all captured groups, and none of them working the way they were intended or by design, none of them opposing each other in the way that they ought to. So here you are with, the whole concept of Congress up in the air because of what's going on. And the whole organization between the executive branch and the legislative branch and the separation of powers that should have been there, that disappeared, and that might be coming back, right? Would any of that happen if it wasn't for the calamity of Trump? If it wasn't for the calamity of Trump, right? There definitely was a separation of powers during Trump's time because Congress just hated him so much, and Democrats controlled much of Congress. So of course there was a lot of what you want, healthy division between those two entities. But now we might get it again. And in the meantime, Trump actually said the first relevant thing I've heard from his campaign so far yesterday, where he talked about the cartels and how those need to be the focus of American military efforts. And he said basically he would attack the cartels if he was elected president and destroy the fentanyl providers in the country. So right away, Trump making a pretty interesting return the past couple of days. But all of this to say, right? We are in a period where we're dealing with the fall of science, and what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to make decisions? And we're dealing with the fall of Congress and the Republic even, and how powers are shared and separated and who wields what power. And we're dealing with the whole concept of centralized control now being proof that it's terrible and doesn't work and can't solve anything. So all of those things in place, to me mean just like when we had an epiphany, when the three kings met Jesus and set the whole world into motion that we've inherited. We've had these events happen, and the pillars upon which the fiat world are built, right? Communications, coordinating with media, coordinating with government, not working anymore. And nature abhors a vacuum. It does not allow vacuums to persist for a long time. Vacuums get wiped out immediately. And that's where Bitcoin comes in, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. And all of these clown world people have created one of the largest vacuums ever. And Bitcoin can fill it. It can fill it psychologically, and that's all that's required, right? If Bitcoin fills the psychological space left from all of this calamity, all of this disillusionment, all of this lack of orientation, lack of direction, lack of incentivized motivation towards goals that would help everyone, right? If that stays, we're going to win quickly. Right? Which is what we want. All right, team. Thanks for sticking with me through the trouble. I got to hop on a call. I appreciate the patience. I'm going to figure this out with the thing, with the audio. Peter Zian speaks about the population numbers being closer to 1.2 billion as well, Brian Peterson says. Yeah, exactly. Part of my information comes from Peter Zian, by the way. Brandon, they might have the best herd immunity in 50 years because of that. Yeah, it could be. Trump pierced the mirage of the oasis that was our republic. Precisely. Yeah. All right, peace, team.